Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing the best books of 2020 in my opinion. Hopefully, if you've read these, you love them as much as I did. If you didn't, that's okay. You can share your feelings in the comments as long as you were still kind. So yeah, anyway, these were all 5 stars. I highly recommend all of them. I'm so excited. I don't have physical copies of most of these because, again, I mostly read last year from my library or from Scribd, or audiobooks that I owned, so I don't have very many books to hold up and show you, but when I do, of course I will. Let's get into it. I did properly rank these, like, from 10 to 1, from, like, least most favorite to most favorite, but of course these are still all my favorites, so yeah, let's talk about them. My 10th most favorite book this year was I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austen Channing Brown. I was doing a lot of reading this year and educating myself on Black issues and civil rights, and I hope all of you were as well, and that we will all be continuing that into 2021 and for the rest of our lives. But this book was the one that hit me the hardest of the ones that I read. It's fairly short, and Austen Channing Brown is a Black woman who was given a white man's name, and I think that's very early in the book where she explains a conversation that she's had with her mother on why she was given that name. It was so that she would have slightly less roadblocks in her life. And the book is just full of her experiences, her education, and a lot of what she talked about were a lot of, like, microaggressions. So a lot of what has happened to her is not super overt racism, quote unquote, but it's still things that people have said and done to her that are really damaging, and it's not just her, it's Black women in general. So that's something that I think is really valuable to read and learn about. It's not just telling Black people and other people of color that they can't go into certain establishments or things like that. It's, second guessing every single thing that a Black woman says in a meeting at work, even if the white man or white woman next to her says the exact same thing and then they get thanked for that idea when it was, like, her idea all along. That kind of stuff. So it's short but impactful, and I highly recommend it to anyone who is wanting to educate yourself a little bit more. Her writing is excellent. Although it's sad that she has to write this book and, explain all these bad things that happened to her, it's still really valuable to read and learn. So it was very good. My 9th favorite book of the year was Slay by Brittany Morris. This is a book that also really surprised me, so it could have gone in my last video as well, but I knew that it was one of my favorites, so I wanted to talk about it here. This book has been popping up on a lot of people's favorites lists, and for good reason. This is about a young teenage girl who creates a virtual reality, like, game. I don't know a lot about online games, so I don't want to say too much, but it's basically a safe haven for Black people, and then someone in real life gets murdered because of something that happened in the game, and all of a sudden there's tons of scrutiny around the game and people trying to figure out who created it because she keeps it, like, super secret. Nobody knows it's her, and there's a lot of people saying this is racist against white people. And it was so good. It has its lighthearted moments. The things in the game are so fun. It's so interesting to read about. But it also, packs a punch and has some very serious moments and serious topics surrounding racism and the idea of reverse racism, which, for the record, does not exist, never has existed, never will exist. So, just so you know. And I don't know, this is another book that's fairly short. It's a young adult contemporary. You can read it fairly quickly, but it packs a punch. And it was so good. So I highly recommend this one as well. My 8th favorite book of the year was Far from the Tree by Robin Benway. This was a book that came out a few years ago. And I think it was sort of making the rounds like when I first started watching BookTube. I feel like it came out in like 2016 or 2017, and I started watching in 2017, I think. So I feel like this was a favorite that was, you know, making the rounds like 3 years ago. But I just read it this year. I think for a long time I wasn't interested in like hard-hitting contemporaries, which is what this is. This is about a group of 3 siblings who were all adopted into different families, one of whom actually stayed in the foster system the whole time. But they eventually find out about each other and meet up and become friends. And so this book kind of goes through what that's like and the way that they are all similar despite not having grown up together, and their similarities and differences. And it just hit really hard. I cried, which I don't often do when reading for some reason. I'm a very emotional person, but sometimes words on a page doesn't hit me as hard. And I was listening to the audiobook for this, which usually makes me cry even less. But I cried, and in like the good cathartic sort of way. You know, it goes through the trials and tribulations of these siblings and, you know, explaining the struggles that they go through, and just so good. So if you were living under a rock like me and didn't read it when it came out, I would suggest that you give it a try if it sounds interesting to you, because it was very, very good. My 7th favorite book of the year was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. This is a young adult mystery that was pretty obviously inspired by the Adnan Syed murder case, which was the topic of the first season of the podcast Serial, which I know blew up when it came out. So if you're familiar with that case at all, you know that there was a lot of shoddy police work surrounding Adnan Syed, and there's a lot of questions surrounding if he actually murdered his girlfriend or maybe ex-girlfriend at the time, but this young woman was found dead, and they convicted him. And this book kind of follows a similar conceit where a high school student was suspected of killing his girlfriend, and he ended up killing himself. And the main character, Pip, doesn't believe that he did it. So she teams up with his younger brother to try to figure out what really happened and clear his name. So that's the concept of the mystery. And I feel like young adult mysteries have a reputation for not being very good. So I typically avoid them, and I wasn't expecting this to be as good as it was, but it was such a tightly wound mystery. Like, you're on edge the whole time trying to figure out who done it and trying to solve the mystery, trying to figure out the clues. There's a lot of red herrings, but not in like a bad way, because sometimes I feel like they're cheap and it's like the author was just trying to like throw you off the trail, but they didn't really lay the groundwork for it. And this definitely did that. I didn't see where it was going at all. I loved it. The sequel is coming out this year. I'm so excited for that. So, you know, if you are wary of YA mysteries because sometimes they're not as great, I think this is one of the great ones, so you should definitely give it a shot. My 6th favorite book of the year was Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. This is another nonfiction. I know, 2 nonfiction books on my favorite books of the year list. Who am I? That's part of why I want to read more nonfiction in 2021, which was one of my goals. That video went up last week for when this video is going up. So I will link that in the places in case you haven't seen it and you're interested in seeing what my goals are for this year. Because as it turns out, I enjoy nonfiction. And this book is about a therapist who is going through a rough patch. So she goes and sees her own therapist as well, and is trying to like work through her stuff. And she is also sharing stories of some of her patients. So we're following her and like how her progress is sort of reflected in the progress of her patients, and all of their journey is sort of intertwining. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. It's narrative nonfiction. It's written in a very conversational style, but there are also some quotes that will like punch you in the gut. And it was So, so, so good. If you have any interest in this topic at all, in the topic of therapy and therapists seeing their own therapists and whatever, please read this book. I think you'll be really surprised. I certainly was. So yeah, it was very good. My fifth favorite book of the year was Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. This, as well as Take a Hint, Dani Brown. That's what Dani's book is called. Both of those have been on people's favorites lists this year as well, for a good reason. I read this book twice. It was so good. It's about this young woman named Chloe Brown who has a near-death experience, and she suddenly realizes that her legacy, as it were, would not really be anything, and she hadn't done very many fun or interesting or cool things in her life. So she makes a list of how to get a life list, and so it has all these things that she wants to check off. And one of those things is moving out of her parents' house. So she does that. She gets her own apartment, and the superintendent in the building, they have sort of this friction, but she realizes that he would be a really good person to help her check some items off of her list. So she sort of enlists him to help, and then romancy things happen because this is a romance book. And it was so cute. Talia Hibbert writes such good banter. She's so funny. She's so funny. I don't know, Talia Hibbert really balances serious topics in her books as well as good romance, good banter, good humor. I think she's become one of my favorite romance authors, if not one of my favorite authors. So as you're watching my wrap-ups this year, don't be surprised to see Talia Hibbert popping up quite a lot, because I plan on going back through her backlist and reading some of her older works. I can't wait to see what else she has coming up. I know the final book, it has to be the final book in the Brown Sister series is coming up this year, because it's about the third sister and there's only 3 of them, so it has to be the last one. But I'm excited. I love Talia Hibbert. If you like romance and you haven't read Talia Hibbert before, read her books. Starting with Chloe Brown, if you would like to, because it was really good. Oh my goodness, I actually have a book to hold up and show you, and it's a fucking brick too, because my number 4 favorite book of the year is The Prior of the Orange Tree. I just dropped my notebook with whatever, that's fine. I've never read any other Samantha Shannon books. I feel like I'm going backwards. I haven't read the Bone Season series, but that's fine. This is an epic high fantasy that is also a standalone, or as Samantha Shannon put it, I saw her say this on Twitter, that this book, the story wraps up on its own, but it's not impossible that she will write more books in this universe. But this story, does stand alone on its own. It has a beginning, middle, and end, and, that's it. This story arc is done, but she might come back to this world, which is very exciting to me because I love it. It is set in a world where there was a war against dragons, 1,000 years ago or something, and they believe that the bloodline of this very, very specific queen will protect them from dragons. So as long as her bloodline continues in the matriarchy of her country, then the world will be safe. And this book basically follows what happens when that turns out to not completely be the case. It follows so many wonderful characters. I think we switch between 5 or 6 perspectives, and they're all so unique and have their own unique voices, and they are so fascinating, and some are very clearly good guys. There is one that I consider the main protagonist. I don't know if she actually is, but in my heart and my soul, that's how I feel. There's a sapphic romance in this. There are kick-ass dragons in this. There's tons of cool magic, and so many things happen, and it was so good. And I was very intimidated by this book because I don't really read high fantasy a lot, especially not high fantasy that is 800 pages. But I did it, and I'm so happy I did because it was so good. I know that a lot of people have already read this book, but if you haven't, I would suggest it if you're interested in it at all. My third favorite book of the year was The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty, which is the first book in the Daevabad trilogy. It is about a young woman named Nari who is basically a con woman, charlatan, who sort of has healing powers, and she doesn't really know why. But this family hires her to help their daughter get better, and she ends up releasing some jinn on the world, and one of them is trying to kill her, and one of them ends up rescuing her, and he's like, you know what? I think you need to go to the city of Brass, which is basically the capital city for jinn. Because he thinks that she's probably part jinn. So part of this book is like this journey where Nari and Dara are on their way to the city of Brass, and then it also follows the court politics. One of the other perspectives in this book is the youngest prince, Ali. Yes, Prince Ali. And he is involved with some of the court politics in that city, as you would think that he would be, because he's the prince. And it was so good. The plot is so tightly wound. A lot of times, sort of political fantasy doesn't really interest me, because I'm just like, I don't want to read about that. Like, I read a lot about politics in my real human life. Like, I don't know that I want this all the time. But it was so interesting the way that that all these different things sort of come together in the story, and unexpected things happen, and it's just, I can't even explain how good it is. Like, I've barely scratched the surface with my description of what this book is about, because it is so much more than that good, and it goes so, like, above and beyond what I have already said. So this is another book that I think a lot of people have already read. The final book came out in 2020. It's a trilogy. The third one came out this year. Last year. It came out last year. Because time. Anyway, so a lot of people have been reading these books and raving about them for good reason, because this first one was excellent, and I can only imagine that the next two are excellent as well. We are down to my top two. So my second favorite book of the year, like, these two flip-flopped in my brain for a really long time, but eventually this is what I settled on. But just know that these are both excellent. My second favorite book of the year is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This book follows Zachary Ezra Rollins after he discovers a book in the library that has a chapter about something that happened to him as a child. And he's like, how the heck? What the heck? What's going on here? And then he's kind of thrust into this adventure of magical books and libraries and keys and bees. And listen, so many people have read The Night Circus, myself included, which I didn't love as much, I think because it was historical fantasy, which I don't always love as much because I don't like historical fiction. This is set in, like, our current present day, so I think that's why I like this one a little bit more. People waited 10 years in between The Night Circus and The Starless Sea, and I'm glad that I didn't have to wait for that, because I would be so sad. But I read this book and absolutely loved it. It doesn't make a lot of sense, always. It's very meandering. Like, the writing is so dreamy. Like, that's what Erin Morgenstern is known for, is having incredibly beautiful, lush writing. And some people might say that her plots are sacrificed for that. I would say that plots are not the point of her book. Her books are about feeling, and this book makes you feel. And it's so hard to describe other than what I've already said. This is something else that I think you should go in pretty blind. But it's very good. If you don't mind books that are a little bit slower, or, like, basically have no plot because they just have beautiful writing instead, then read this book, because I think you'll really like it. Okay, and now we are here at my favorite book of the year. I wasn't expecting this one to be my absolute favorite, but here we are. Middle Game by Seanan McGuire. This is the first full-length novel from Seanan McGuire that I've read. I've read all of the Wayward Children's books so far, unless by the time you see this, the sixth one is out, which I think maybe it is. I don't remember when it comes out, but her books, they usually come out in January. Anyway, but I've never read, like, a Mira Grant novel, so this is my first full-length novel from this author. This is about twins named Roger and Dodger, one who has an affinity for math and one who has an affinity for languages. And they were basically created as experiments to like help this mad scientist rule the world. And I absolutely loved it. I feel really bad because I was supposed to buddy read this with my friend Zach from Zach Tries to Read back in like May, but both of us were like feeling very pandemic burnt out, so we ended up not reading it. And then I eventually just like read it without him. So Zach, I'm really sorry. We'll read the next one together? Question mark. We'll try. But this book is just absolutely amazing. Again, like so many of these books, like what I've just described is like the very bare bones of the premise of this book. Shauna McGuire's writing is insane. Like, she's so smart. The way that she twists languages and her words, and the way that she comes up with plots is like bonkers. Like, I love her brain so much. Shauna McGuire, I love your brain. Like, it's amazing. So this is a book that is like so weird but so good. So if you like weird but good, which I think I'm starting to realize is what I like, that I think you will like this book. If you like the Wayward Children series, this is sort of like that, but like turned up, like more mature, I would say. And I'm so excited to see what comes next in Roger and Dodger's journey. I don't even know if there is a release date for the second book yet. I'm pretty sure there's not a cover or anything, but I love Shauna McGuire. She's one of my favorite authors. This book like really solidified that for me. Like, now that I know that she can do novellas and full-length books, like, I am ready. So whatever comes next, I'm excited. All right, friends, that is it. That is all of my best books of 2020. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you've read any of these and you want to share your thoughts, I would love to hear them. Or if you're excited about some of these books now that I've talked about them, I would love to hear that. If you want to be my friend on any other social medias, the links will be down below. Leave a comment, like, and subscribe. I will see you all next time. Bye!